Hey, it's Jeremy from Tested, and today I'm here to talk about the C64 Mini. Now this is of course a miniature version of what many of us remember as the Commodore 64. The computer that came out in 1982 ruled most of the 80s, sold I think 17 million of them by the time it was discontinued about 12 years later. So obviously there is a big audience for a remake of that in an easy-to-use HDMI version for a budget cost. This goes for $80. It's available at a lot of retailers now. It does not have a working keyboard. I know that's question number one. But I'll get in more to that in a second. I did not actually own a C64. I always wanted one. So this appealed to me because there were games that only came out on this that I've always wanted to play, like weird games like BC's Quest for Tires and everything. Well, the games that come on this are not necessarily the games I wanted to play, or maybe the games that you remember or you wanted to play. There's a handful of good ones. 64 games come bundled on this, and a lot of them include games like the Epics series. You remember the Summer Games and World Games, and maybe most importantly, California Games is on here. That's one of my favorites from back in the day. But if the games that you don't want to play aren't, if the games that you want to play aren't on this, you're in luck, because with the latest firmware, you can actually drop your games onto a USB stick, plug it in the side, and an icon appears at the bottom of the screen, and it allows you to play any game that you download from the internet. Now there is a caveat: you can't play multi-disc games natively. But there is a guy named Vinny, and if you happen to have one of these, you can Google C64 Mini hacks, and it will be the first thing that comes up. It's not really a hack. It's just a bunch of games that he has compiled into single files. So you can drop them on a drive and put them on here and run them. So almost any game that you can remember from the C64 era, it's very easily playable. Unlike the NES Mini or the SNES Mini, where if you didn't like the games that were on there, you had to go through some real hoops in order to get them working, get them on there and running, this natively runs anything that the Commodore 64 used to run. It's quite good at that. The Joypad that comes with it is a remake of the C64 Joypad, joystick. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good for nostalgia factor because it feels like the real deal. However, this was not necessarily like the best joystick design that could possibly be invented. In fact, 2 years later, the NES would create the gamepad, which was the de facto way to play games from there on. And while this does support some gamepads, it did not support any that I have at home, so I couldn't get them working. There's a wiki online. You can find a list of gamepads that have been tested to work on this, but I warn you, it is not many at this point in time. Maybe they'll unlock more with future firmware updates. I don't know. You can also buy a second one of these from the company if you want to play multiplayer games. The act of playing the games that come on the system is very straightforward. The joystick allows you to go through a menu of all 64 of them. You select the ones you want. If they require keyboard support, if the games ask you to type something, you use these additional buttons they've added to the joystick. One of them will bring up a menu. You bring up a virtual keyboard and allows you to, with your joystick, select the letter that you want to type and enter it. That is as tedious as it sounds. And so if you would like, rather than doing that, you can hook up a USB keyboard to the device, to the second USB jack. However, again, kind of like the gamepad, the first keyboard that I connected didn't actually work. There's another wiki online you can find with a list of keyboards that do work. I think the list of keyboards is actually quite vast. It just so happens the first keyboard I tried had a lot of LEDs on it or was drawing too much power. I don't know. The second basic keyboard I tried worked fine. And that does work to type anywhere you need, which includes the BASIC app. So this actually ships one of the games you can activate is BASIC, which is the old computer language a lot of us grew up in the 80s learning how to use. And so you can launch that up, type in your program, 10 print, always be testing, 20 go to 10, and it will fill the screen with your awesome code. And you can write games. You just can't save them. So it's an interesting sandbox form of programming, but it's one that's worth having on there. And it does allow you to get at least a taste of what it was like to have a C64, which really was a game a lot of people learned how to program on and make games. The act of playing games that you put on the USB stick, however, is a bit more Wild West, because these are games that were not necessarily made to expect just the joystick, whereas all the games that ship on it are more or less calibrated simply for joystick use, sparingly expecting a keyboard. The ones on the drive almost entirely are going to launch with Cracktros, where you're seeing these old cracker introductions with all of their credits, and you're going to see trainers like, do you want to play a high score game or do you want to play with infinite lives? And you're going to have to go into your virtual keyboard and you're going to type yes and no, and this is a number of how many lives I want to have, that kind of thing, and find the correct button, often the space bar, in order to progress to the actual game. And that's the price of emulating a PC instead of a game console, which we're so familiar with now. When Nintendo releases the NES Mini and the SNES Mini, all they have to do is include a gamepad, because that is 100% of the interface that the player always had with the game. With a computer, you really do need that keyboard. So whether or not that level of emulation is enough for you is up to you to decide. It is only $80, and importantly, Retro Games has announced that they are working on a full-size C64 emulator. Maybe not the Mini, but it will be a new 64 with all the guts inside, just like this, but with a working keyboard. No price or availability announced yet, but I'll be curious to see what that is. I guarantee it won't be $80, and it probably won't be available this year. So if you're looking for something for Christmas, maybe for the retro gamer or the gamer archaeologist in your life, check it out. All the links are below. Thanks for watching.